Hello. I'm working for, I'm waiting for a attorney. Hi.
I hope.
Hi. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Am I audible?
You are audible. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm in my studio. Those are some of my unfinished pieces and empty canvases, etc. And welcome. I see we already have one of Botswana's biggest YouTubers here with us. Hi, Horata. Hello and welcome to Creative Cut Talks, the show that promotes the show that aims to promote sustainable visual arts and to bridge the gap between art creators and consumers. Today I'm joined by a very interesting guest. I would always see him in art spaces. I'd always see him, in newspapers and newspaper headlines doing big things. And I actually didn't know who he actually was. He lives art and he's passionate about art spaces. And then one day I attended his workshop, and trust me, it was worth every buck. Letlhogonolo, I'm not going to take away from you. Please introduce yourself, introduce Park Gray, what you do and why you do it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the introduction. It was lovely. It was lovely. My name is Letlhogonolo Moremi. I am an attorney by training. I am an intellectual property consultant and creative development practitioner. Sorry, English is losing me on a Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? But yes, those are my three primary fields of work which are relevant to this conversation. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have much else to say.
So you say you're a creative development practitioner. What is that?
Right. So a creative development practitioner is somebody who works firstly in creative spaces and works to develop creative spaces and develop the capacities of creatives to become a sustainable economic force, so to speak. So it's about professionalizing the creative sectors. It's about capacitating business people in the creative sectors. And it's about basically just taking the creative sector and turning it into a functioning ecosystem that is able to produce both creative and economic outputs.
Interesting. And what are some of the strides that what are some of the successes and some of your projects, if you may?
Right. Um, I think, an important part of our work at Parkway is public education, which I think is how we met. We were hosting one of our workshops. So we conduct workshops that focus on, again, improving the capacities of players and various people in the creative intellectual property. They'll center around, business, the conduct of business within creative sectors. And then we've also hosted, you know, online info sessions, so to speak. Sorry, I have a kitten and he's really disturbing me right now. Jennifer, you need to go. Stop it. Okay, I'm very sorry about that. I tried to hold out for as long as
No
possible.
worries.
Uh, so yeah, it's about so what we've done then. I think one of the first workshops we did was a workshop about digital storytelling, and we were hosting this with some of the creatives in Dar es Salaam, and then you know did we hosted several similar workshops in Botswana. You know, largely centering on creative business and again intellectual property as an aspect of the creative economy.
Interesting. So your men's international. And
Yes.
then you
Well,
you
I hope.
are You can go.
No, I think I hope to be.
Okay. Letlhogonolo, you are also an intellectual property attorney. How is that different from all other lawyers?
Well, so I mean, an intellectual property attorney just means that my primary focus is on intellectual property law, which I think it's an area that is still underserved in Botswana. I think when we founded Parkray, it was the first consulting firm of its kind to be focusing on such an area. Um, Not to say there haven't been other people who have been, doing IP work. Of course, there are people who've been doing IP work, but to the level with which we are dedicating the focus and the core of our business to, was something that is still, yet to be done before we came onto the scene. And I think just choosing that, I think going into IP for me was a merger of, I've always been passionate about the creative industries. I've always been passionate about the creative sectors. Guys, if you see a light following me, please know that my cat did it. Thanks. So I've always been passionate about the creative sector, and I've always been passionate about creativity just in general, whether it's in art, whether it's in science, whether it's in any field you can imagine. And I think going into IP for me was sort of having studied law because, I liked, the pursuit of the law. And it was sort of this common area where these two passions were just colliding for me, and it was a very natural go-to for me.
Yeah. Interesting. So you spoke, you're a consultancy firm, and I've heard that there are law firms. And what's the difference between the two, and what are, I mean?
Right. So what we do as a consultancy firm is we provide a broad spectrum of services. What we do is, of course, we do provide legal advice on on your IP and on your commercial matters, but the scope of our work extends to going beyond just saying, okay, this is what we think legally. It's also going into, how do we structure your business, how do we structure your intellectual property assets. If you're looking for an investor into to invest in your work that produces IP output, how do we quantify your IP, how do we value your IP, how do we convince investors, and how do we make sure that investors get a return on investment on the intellectual property that you're producing. So we are a broad spectrum consulting firm, just focusing on IP.
Okay, so Letlhogonolo, when we talk about the creative industry, it's quite broad. Creative Cut primarily focuses on visual arts. So not to say that we don't appreciate other creatives, but it's a visual arts page. So I'd like to understand, in terms of your law firm, what do you offer visual artists? So your consultancy firm.
Right. So what we offer visual artists, it's basically just what I just mentioned about firstly,
Okay.
let's look at your legal rights, right? What qualifies as having copyright, what qualifies as not having copyright. When you do produce work that has copyright, how do you protect that copyright? When you are trading in work that is copyrighted, or that is copyright protectable, how do you then what are the key terms to look for in a contract, for example, right? If you're selling an artwork, what rights should you keep? What rights should you give away? Are you just selling the material without selling the copyright, or are you selling both material and copyright? Because those are two different things. So it's basically just that legal holistic advice, and sort of contract management is also another important aspect of what we do. In case you are entering into a transaction, we look at the kind of transaction you're entering into. We look at what kind of contracts you need, the terms of that contract, and also structuring of your IP assets. What are the primary IP assets that you're producing? How much are they valued at? how do you invest in their value and how do you invest in their sale? Because I think at the end of the day, you'd be creating artwork for sale.
Yeah. Okay. So without, I don't want us to go into a workshop today because I know, we in Creative Cut, we talk about monetizing the industry. But I want us to focus on just the general overview and the significance of IP and, how, what we can gain from it, what troubles we can face, etc., without giving a workshop, because I know they're not free. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the primary purpose was
I hope we don't lose him. I think we lost Letlhogonolo right there. We are gonna wait a bit for Letlhogonolo. Yay, he's back. Letlhogonolo.
Hello.
We are waiting. Yay!
Hi, my apologies. Technology is not being my friend.
We know the pains. We understand the pains. But before you left, for those of you that are joining us, welcome. We're today with Letlhogonolo Moremi, a creative development practitioner and an intellectual property attorney. Before technology was unfriendly, we were talking about the general overview and significance of IP and why, as visual artists, we should consider that. Over to you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the indulgence. I was going to start off by saying the reason why intellectual property frameworks exist is to allow creators to reap benefit from their intellectual labor. It's for you to create something and then have primarily, of course, have that attribution of saying this is so and so's work and it belongs to them and they own that work. Secondly, with that attribution, it's saying whatever economic benefit, whatever economic profits are derived from this work, they are rightly attributable to the creator of the work being so and so. So the idea behind it is that the more we incentivize people to create, and the more we provide those protections for them, the more they're able to benefit from their work, the more they're able to feel the need to create more, the more they feel the incentive to create. So creativity itself as a whole benefits and society benefits, because when artists are able to benefit from their work, they feel the need to create more, or they are motivated to create more. So that is the primary reason why intellectual property exists. And then, then it's about going into the framework itself and saying, then what's in place? How do I use what's in place to protect what I have created? How do I use the laws that are in place to protect what I have created, and what I have, and how do I use those frameworks to protect my interests? Because it may not necessarily just be about protecting the copyright that exists in the work. It may also be about protecting the business interests that you have. As an artist, of course, you are a business person. You are producing art for sale, for trade. So it's about knowing your economic rights. Can I, once I've sold a piece, can I create a piece that's the same as it? Because it may be good for my brand to have that kind of consistency. Does it infringe upon the rights of the person who's bought this piece? Those are the kind of considerations that would come into play that go just beyond the piece itself. And of course, even beyond the visual medium itself, you also have things like, like I mentioned, brand, right? As an artist, you might want to have your name as a brand. And what happens when your brand is infringed upon, right? What happens when somebody uses either a logo or a name that looks similar to how you sign your art pieces? So these are it's an all-encompassing framework that is meant to protect your work and is meant to protect your business. And it's very important for artists and creators to really familiarize themselves with the details and the basic aspects of whatever intellectual property framework exists in whichever country that they live in. And I specify country because these frameworks are different from country to country. So it's about knowing, if I want to trade as an artist in Botswana, what do I need to know about Botswana? If I want to trade as an artist in South Africa, what do I need to know about South Africa and its intellectual property framework?
Okay. So are we saying the main reason why we should have IP is to incentivize the artists? So that's the main reason, and that's the backbone of IP.
That is the backbone of IP. I mean, the backbone of it again, the incentive is sort of it's sort of secondary. The primary reason is, as an artist, you must have that attribution, and you must have that right of ownership over the work that you create, right? So, once you are given that ownership, and once you are given that attribution, then you are able to be motivated to contribute to society more through your work more, because your work directly benefits you and is directly attributable to you. It's about, and this attribution is not just about saying, hey, Letlhogonolo created that painting. It's also about recognizing that Letlhogonolo made a contribution to society, because art often explores the themes of of the societies that we live in, right? It often explores the questions that we have about life. It explores the fears, hopes, dreams that we have. So when you create a piece, you are contributing to that conversation. If an academic writes an article and they put their name on it, we recognize that they've contributed to the discourse of whatever topic that they are writing about. It's similar for artists. Once you create a body of work and you put it out into the public, we are able to recognize your contribution to the public conversation or to the public psyche through attributing this work to you. And I think this point becomes even more relevant after COVID, because I know people usually like to say, no, especially in Botswana, they'll say, Kidi artist, da 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 da.
Yeah.
But imagine during COVID, when we were all stuck at home, when all superficiality had been lost, art was the only thing we had, whether it was books, music, movies, series, whatever. The people who got us through this pandemic are the creators. And we should be able to recognize their contribution to our general well-being and our general existence as a society. And I think that at the core is what lies at the core of having an IP framework.
Interesting. Now, let me ask. We do recognize them and we do appreciate them. But what is their take home beyond just registering the IP? What are some of the benefits that the visual artists can get?
Right. So in so I'm going to focus a little bit on copyright, because visual work primarily falls within, it is protected by copyright. So copyright is the kind of protection that attaches to artistic and literary works. So copyright is basically a bundle of rights. It's not just one right. It's many things that you can or can't do by virtue of having that bundle of rights. So, for example, you'd have what are known as moral rights. So moral rights are basically rights of attribution, to say, if I create an art piece, I would want to have my name on that art piece, no matter who buys the art piece, no matter where the art piece goes. I must always be credited as the person who's created this art piece. Alternatively, you could be saying, I don't want to be credited as having created this art piece. So the minute it leaves my studio, nobody must ever know that it was me. You could also have a right to say, nobody must ever modify my work in any other way, in any way that would distort the sort of the essence of the work. So, for example, if you're a photographer and you take a photograph, and then I go and I post it on Instagram and I use those Valencia filters and all of it, it may as well be an infringement on that moral right to have people to not have your work modified. Again, these rights that I just spoke about are about artists owning work, artists' work being attributed to them, and them having sort of creative control over their work by virtue of their ownership. On top of the moral rights, you have what are known as economic rights. So these deal with like the commercial aspect now. Who has the right to sell the work? Who has the right to publish the work? Who has the right to duplicate the work? Right? So the person who owns the copyright has rights to do those things in respect of the work. And the point of copyright is that anybody who is not the copyright owner or the copyright holder cannot do those things in respect of that particular work. So I can't see your painting and then I go and I take your painting and then I start making copies of it, because I don't own the copyright. You're the only person that has the right to create any modification, any reproduction, any variation, etc., to that particular body of work. So the economic rights then deal with the monetary reward that you would get from creating, right? If I go make reproductions of your work, I'm interfering with your money, because ideally you should be the one that's doing that and making money off of that. So if I'm doing it, I'm interfering with the economic aspects of your work. So this is why they are known as, economic rights, because they deal with the financial consequences of your work.
Okay, understood. Now, as you spoke, I remembered some of the articles that I've seen in the past. I've noticed that some collectors, attorneys, artists, and especially consumers are not in agreement of with this whole IP thing. Most of the sentiments are to the effect, why should the artist maintain the IP rights? They've sold the painting to me, they've sold the quilt to me, they've sold the drawing to me, the sculpture. Why should they continue maintaining the rights to this work? And you spoke of incentivizing the artists. But the bigger question is, what are some of the other sentiments that I've not heard in terms of, the IP debate, and where do you stand and why?
Right. So, I mean, I think as a creative development practitioner, my obvious standpoint is always with the artists. It's always with the creators, And I think, I do get the question you're asking, because when, like you're saying, you have, legal practitioners, you have creators, you have buyers. And everybody sort of comes in with their own interests. If I am an attorney and my client is buying your artwork, I would want the terms of that contract or the terms of that agreement to favor my client. So I may want you to give up copyright, so that my client can have sort of full ownership and continue to make money from this work without you ever coming near my client's bank account, right? When I am an artist and I'm selling, I would want those terms to favor me. I might want to retain copyright because I want to make sure that I'm able to have a course of action against anybody who sorry, I want to have course of action against anybody who infringes on the copyright that subsists in my work. So, there are different positions because there are different players in the market, and each player is focused on their own interests, which I guess is fair. It's how business works. Everybody's pushing for their own agenda. But my thing is always protecting the artist is the biggest thing for me. Making sure the artists are not taken advantage of, and making sure the artists are protected and put at an advantage. I stand there because this whole landscape that we speak of would not exist without their contribution, right? So for there to
Definitely.
be for there to be a buyer, there has to be a creator. And as much as I was saying before, artists, we've seen through the pandemic just how much they contribute to society and just how much they contribute to our daily lives. So if we do not empower them to be able to have their rights protected, be able to maximally benefit from their intellectual labor, then where is that incentive? They no longer have incentive to create. I mean, if you're working any job and all you're doing is getting taken advantage of, at some point you just want to give up and stop working, right? So
Definitely.
when we ensure that artists' interests are protected, we make sure that we give them enough reason to continue supporting society and contributing to society in the way that they do. And that's why my position is always with the artist.
It's about sustainability.
It's about sustainability, and also it's about just recognition of work, just recognition of work to say, listen, you have somebody who's contributed something, and it's intellectual effort, it's intellectual labor. It deserves that kind of respect, and it deserves that kind of protection around it. I mean, if we have laws literally that say you can't pay someone less than X amount of money per hour, right? That is protection for that person's labor. And because
Yeah.
my philosophy is, of course, anything that results in IP is intellectual labor, it's intellectual work, so if we're able to value one type of work and say, okay, you can't, this is the minimum standard, you can't treat this person any less than this, why can't we have the same for artists?
Wow.
What they do is what they do, and what they produce is labor. What they're contributing is labor. We can have the same frameworks in place, and that's really the reasoning behind my position.
This is very, very interesting. I've never heard of this minimum price or minimum appreciation. I've never heard of this in the creative industry. I can't wait for the day that actually materializes. Is it one of your projects?
Um, not at the moment, not at the moment. But again, as a creative development practitioner, these are things that we are sort of conversing about and seeing how we can have to make a reality. The unfortunate thing about being in this line of work in Botswana is that you are sort of there is not a fully developed ecosystem to support your contribution and to support the kind of visions that you want to have. So it's about pulling together fragments from there, and trying to create a better future for all Botswana. But I think patience perhaps is a virtue, and in time, hopefully, these are things that we will achieve.
Tab mods are 100. That means, that is amazing. I mean, that is on 100, and that's on period. So let me ask this. Do people understand IP where we are right now, as creatives, as consumers?
Um, good question, because my answer is always no.
Uh-huh.
Which is really what motivates. So when we founded Parkway IP, we wanted to provide a service. We wanted to provide, that sort of legal and business consulting in intellectual property. The challenge that we faced then was to find out that nobody knew the service that we wanted to provide. Nobody knew where it mattered. Yeah. I mean, and I'm using nobody very generously. Of course, there are people who know, but I'm saying the generality of people, or the generality of the clients that we wanted to serve, were sort of like not aware of even the rights that they had. So that's what motivated us to start, this workshop aspect of our work, where we say, if we really want to help creatives, the first thing that we're going to have to do is to teach them what rights they have and why those rights matter. Then when somebody breaches those rights, then that's when they can know to come to us. So it became this sort of like cycle thing, where we have to teach our clients in order for our clients to sort of figure out that they need us.
Okay, so let me ask this. I'm not saying nobody doesn't need, we need you, we appreciate you, we understand your services, now we're away. But I just have a question. I'm curious. So if people didn't know about all these things and they still continued creating, yet we're saying IP is here to incentivize them, are we sure about that? And how are the stats?
Great question. I love it. So society, throughout human history, humans have always been creating. But what you have to look at now is, if you look at countries that have strong IP frameworks, countries that provide strong incentives for creativity, you will see that they have booming markets, booming art and cultural markets that, allow for creativity in those countries to be such a huge contribution to the economy. I mean, America has the whole world convinced that they're the greatest country in the world by way of the media, music, movies that they produce. They're able to have that kind of cultural power because they put in place strong IP frameworks to say, if you make a movie, this is what you can get. If you are an artist, this is what you can get. Right? So when you have a country that has a strong IP framework that strongly incentivizes creation, the kind of cultural and economic power that comes out of that, because artists are in such a fulfilling environment, is amazing. Coming back home, where we're still getting started, people are still creating, but the economic power and the cultural power is just, it's little, it's not the same, but we're getting there.
When you give the example of those countries, I totally agree. I mean, you take Asian countries and Asian art, you take European art, you take America, especially in terms of all, other forms of creativity. You do see what IP can do, and those regulations and standards. I now truly see the value of IP. I can't wait to attend the workshop for creatives, or specifically for visual artists, if you may, because I know I attended a different one, but I still learned a lot. Anyway, moving on. So with IP, most of the times when we think of IP, we think of trouble. What sort of, measures can an artist or a visual artist or a consumer of visual arts take to avoid, maybe infringing people's rights or just getting into trouble in any way?
Right. So there's, especially because we're talking about visual art, which is primarily protected by copyright. It's a bit of a tricky question to answer, because I always say with copyright, it's not really worth much until something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
So you can't really say, I'm going to sue for infringement of copyright until somebody has infringed your copyright. So it's that sort of thing, and it creates a lot of investment in terms of knowing who's creating what, and sort of even getting to discover that your work has been infringed upon, and having legal resources in place to take any action when your work is infringed upon. So it's it does take a bit of a lot. But I know, I always say SEPA has this service where you can register your copyrighted works. While that won't stop anyone from infringing your copyright, it does make it very easier to enforce your rights. So if I take your art piece and then I go and reproduce it somewhere, and there's already a database that says, well, this kind of work belongs to so and so. We don't even have to go to court to argue about, oh, it's mine, no, it's hers, no, it's mine. There's already a record in place that says this is yours. So we've already established who's wrong there. Another thing, of course, would be try as much as best as you can to know, the type of transaction you're entering into, and know how to protect your interest in that transaction, right? If you are selling an artwork, are you selling the material? Are you selling the copyright? Know the difference between those two. So know also how to value your work. If you're selling the material for 200 pula, how much do you think the copyright is worth? Because the copyright will give whoever owns it the ability to recreate that work. So those are things to look into. And also just try as much as you can, if you go online, especially if you live in Botswana, if you go online and Google Copyright and Neighboring Rights Act, you will get the legal framework that exists in Botswana for protecting copyright. I know it's legal language and all of that, but it will at least give you some basic ideas around what your rights are, and what would constitute a breach if you did it, or if another person did it. So for me, I always say knowledge. You can't work in you can't work in a field and not know anything about it. So knowledge is the primary thing that you need to take care of yourself and to take care of your business.
Interesting. Please repeat the site or website we can go and see that, so just so that we share it, or maybe slide on my DM after that, so that when we air the episode, we have it for the viewers. My next question, there's this concept of resale rights, because I can imagine when we talk visual arts, it's mostly piece by piece. And according to another workshop I attended, not yours, of course, it was there was something about you have to submit each and every piece so that we know, and it's a very tedious and somewhat I don't know if it's possible process, So, but now there's an issue of giving resale rights to certain consumers. How does that work?
So resale rights basically are rights that would entitle the creator to a portion of the the proceeds of any sale that has to do with the artwork. So kind of like royalties. So what would be is I buy your artwork, right? Let's say I buy it for $10. And in the agreement that we sign, you say, okay, going forward, when you sell this work, when you sell the work, if I sell the work, you are entitled to, let's say, 10%. So if I sell the work for 200 to the next person, you would be entitled to a portion of that transaction, as you are the creator of the work. So it's an economic right that you can still enforce even after you've dealt away or sold the material. And I think, again, it's about varying interests, right? If I'm a collector and I want to buy an art piece and I want to keep the money, I mean, the art world is crazy. I could be buying something for 10,000 and selling it for 200. So it's sometimes I might want to not share that money with the creator. For whatever reason, I may not want to share that money, but it's the art market. It is the way it is. So as the creator, of course, you would say, I want I want to have a portion of these. I want to have a portion of these of a portion of any future sales. I, as the collector, would say, why should I give you that money? I've already bought that from you, so it belongs to me, da da da. But again, these things, where they are not legislated, they are contractual, which is why I gave the example in Botswana, to say it may be a matter of just simply saying, future sales of the work, I think I give you X amount. I know that there are countries that have this legislated, into their laws. So I think the Netherlands is one of them. I'm not sure. They have things great up there. So it would be, so you have countries that have this legislated into the law to say, there is sort of like a collective rights management organization, right? That would be sort of monitoring these transactions, collecting these fees on behalf of the artist and paying them out to the artists, sort of like what Cosbots does with royalties.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's I it's an issue of varying interest, and then again with the legislative aspect, it's also an issue of, do we have the right leaders in place to kind of put these measures for us in place, that sort of thing.
But I mean, you're a creative industry practitioner, so I think with time,
Yes.
so, but my issue is, so I would like to understand, what is your stand in terms of resale rights? Because when you think of, that debate between, the attorneys, the collectors, etc., that are not in agreement with IP, do you by any chance think maybe resale rights are what would meet everybody halfway? Because I mean, they give a bit of leeway and they still benefit the artist.
Right. So, I mean, for me, I am for, right? I do believe that, just in the same way that um, sort of like a musician, continues to get royalties no matter how many times the song is played.
Yeah.
The the artists should continue to be a part of the transaction no matter how many times the work is sold or traded in. I really think it's the same principle for me. And I think it's also, for me, it also enforces the aspect of ownership as well. Artists need to be part of the ecosystem as a whole, I don't think artists should be people that we sort of take work from and then shut out of the whole conversation.
Yeah.
Because in the absence of having that resale right, I think that's what happens. And I always advise clients, always make sure that you are entitled to something further down the line, because that way you are able to continue benefiting from your work, even when it's no longer within your hands, even when it's being traded by somebody else. By virtue of the fact that it is your work, you are able to still be a part of that conversation, and you are able to continue benefiting from that work.
Interesting. I'll go back again and ask, so how's the IP landscape in Botswana in terms of visual artists, in terms of the loopholes and, the strides and etc.?
Right. We have a rudimentary, I mean, not to say rudimentary to say it's bad, but to say it could use a bit more development. We do have the Copyrighted Neighboring Rights Act, which provides sort of like the basic legal framework for protection of visual art. Again, this is not, in my view, it's something that needs development, because the ways in which art is being dealt with, the ways in which art is being sold, has changed, especially since there's been great advancements in technology, and technology has really changed how we interact with a lot of transactions. So now we're getting into conversations about NFTs and the like. These are things that are these are things that our law needs to be sort of catching up with, but we're still a couple of steps behind. The issue with that then is, because our artists are going to continue producing and selling to the rest of the world and dealing with the rest of the world, we may find that the protections that we have in place for them are inadequate, which is what motivates this necessity for development of the legal framework. The other issue is, the legal framework exists, but the people that it serves do not necessarily know what's in the framework or how to access the framework. That's another issue. So you have the laws in place, but the artists themselves don't know what exactly is entailed in those laws. So they can't really use them because they don't know, So we need more education in that aspect. We need more education of creators and artists to bring them into the fold about this is what your rights are, and this is what you can do when your rights are infringed.
I think we lost Letlhogonolo. He should be back in a bit. Earlier on, we established he's having challenges, but I believe he'll be here with us soon. We are talking intellectual property rights, basically art and the law. Park Gray IP is a creative industry consultancy firm. We should be with him shortly. We had a very interesting one, and he served a few and highlighted the importance and significance of IP. He offers workshops for creatives, for creative industries, for entrepreneurs, time and again. And when we lost him, he was explaining the importance of the current atmosphere, rather, of IP in the country. I see he's back online. Hopefully he will join us anytime now. Yay, we're back with you again. Are you there? Am I audible? No, you're not, but you may proceed. Yes, I think we can hear you now. Oh no, we lost him again.
Hello.
Hi, now you are audible.
There's a lot that's going on.
No worries. I guess it is what it is.
So sorry about that. So I was saying the third aspect is the access to legal representation, the access to the means to do anything about your situation, right? So you may be an artist and your artwork has been infringed upon, but if you can't do anything about it, then what good is the IP laws that we have in place? They don't really serve any purpose then. So that's another thing that we need to fix, which is part of the long-term strategy of our creative development work, is then how do we create institutions that would allow artists to be able to enforce their rights?
Interesting. So, Letlhogonolo, this is our last episode of the year before we go on production break. So you seeing to it that you're the one closing it up for us. Please share something that helps bridge the gap between art creators and consumers in terms of art and the law or creative development.
Oh my God, that is such a heavy responsibility. You're putting all of
the pressure.
Right. I mean, do you know, I think I will begin first with speaking, to the consumers to say we as consumers often have the idea that, we look at art as something that is either for a certain class of people who can afford expensive paintings, or we look at it as in the people who do it are people who aren't serious, which is very weird, because if you're going to think that something is for the rich few, yet the people who produce that aren't serious. That's a bit of a counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, but I think I would just like to say, we've seen through the past 2 years that at the end of the day, what we will have is the music, it's the art, it's the books, it's the movies, it's the people who create these things that comfort us when we're sad, you know, carry us when we're feeling happy, express the ideas that we want to that we struggle to express, or help us feel the emotions that we want to feel. And these are things that are so basic to our existence as human beings. You really cannot live without that part of yourself as a human being, which I then pose a challenge to say, let's rethink the position of artists in society. If we see that the whole world can shut down and the only people who are left relying on are doctors and artists, we really need to rethink about, you know, the positions that we think artists occupy in society, the position that art occupies in society. Once we realize that we were left with doctors and artists and we are willing to pay that much for doctors, ask yourself why you're not willing to pay that much to engage an artist to provide the service for you that kept you alive through a whole pandemic. And you know, and I think, you know, towards artists, again, it's an invitation to the same conversation. And as much as I'm always advocating for artists and, you know, advocating for professionalism and all of these things, artists, they themselves need to start showing up for themselves in that conversation, need to start showing up and doing more to understand the environments that they operate in, doing more to demand better for themselves as professionals. You know, there's these tropes that, oh, if you know, if you invite an artist to a meeting, they're going to be 10 minutes late, right? It's a bad stereotype, but is it
Yeah,
entirely untrue?
very bad.
Right? Is it entirely
Because
untrue?
I,
It's
for
not.
example, do German time.
Right. Always. So you when you have to deal with artists then, or with people who don't respect time, but because we have to realize, in as much as artists create, right, there's a they're not playing alone as the art industry. You have the financial sector that could be financing this aspect of business, right? You have the legal sector that could be looking at, you know, the legal aspect of this business. So you have all of these different sectors, and there's interplay between all of these sectors. So, you know, it's about then understanding that you don't just operate in a silo as an artist, with working with principles and conventions that other artists understand. As a business person, you are working with other business people who may have different ethics than yours, and you need to find a way of bridging that gap. I mean, you know, of course, I'm an attorney by training, but that doesn't mean that if I'm walking into a meeting with artists, I have to be like, yes, the law. I have to understand, okay, I'm dealing with my client. This is how these are my client's ethics, and this is how my client works. Without betraying my own ethics, how do we bridge the gap? That's what makes a successful relationship. And I think artists need to focus more on, like, you know, relationship development, relationship management, because I have no doubts about the talent. The talent is there, it's abundant. We just need to work more on the business aspects.
Wow. Thank you for that, Letlhogonolo. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. In conclusion, please let us know where we can find you, what sort of services you can offer us, your social media plugs, because I believe maybe you would like to slide on your DM, where your offices are, etc.
Right. So we are primarily a digital office. We do have a physical location, which is an African mall, but we rarely take physical meetings because, of course, COVID, and you know, things like that. So our primary platform is, you know, we are online. There's, you know, with technology, there's nothing we can do nowadays. So find us on social media, Park Gray IP. across all social media platforms. Follow us on this page that I've joined this live with. Slide into our DMs. We'll be very happy to help you. We provide, you know, legal, of course, legal advice, legal consulting. We provide business consulting. We provide asset structuring, asset valuing. Just in it, and if you want to also learn about IP, we conduct workshops that we may conduct at a request. If you are, for example, if you have like, I don't know, 10 of your friends and you're like, we want to learn about this, then we can, curate a workshop specifically for you and your needs. Or you can just keep watching our social media pages to see which workshop we're going to be hosting next and see if you can attend. Otherwise, yeah, that's where you can find us. You can also contact me on 73410039. To repeat that, it's 73410039. So yeah, we're always happy to be at your service. Thanks.
Thank you. One last question.
Yes.
Visual artists sometimes get contracted by galleries or shows or online platforms. Do you by any chance do contract reviews and advise and whatnot?
Absolutely. We do contract, right? We write the contracts, we review the contracts, we administer the contracts, we manage the contractual relationships. So yes, we would be very happy to assist.
Thank you very much. That is all for today. Thanks for tuning in. This is Creative Cut, bridging the creator consumer gap. Goodbye and see you next year.
Creative Cut, filling the creator consumer gap.